ladies and gentlemen, to the Hearthstone Grand Prix here at Valencia in Spain. We have just finished our first round of Swiss. We promise you that was as fast as we could go. The last matches have only just finished. We now have our second match set up and ready to go. Joining me for this one is Lothar and our new face, Mr. Neil Lorinda Bond, joining the desk for the first time. How are you guys doing?
It's going good, being out there while you guys were casting, going through the atmosphere. There's a lot of people out there playing Hearthstone. Like 320 was signed up. I think we've got 280 something playing. It's mad out there.
From what I heard, it's 288
Wow.
actually. So when you think about it, it's quite a crowd. It's like 10 classes in school.
That is one way to look at it.
How many I went to.
They are about as difficult to herd into doing anything productive as a group as 10 classes of school children at the same time.
Good one.
But we have our second round game coming up, and I believe it's going to be Powder versus Xzirez is going to be our on-screen matchup. So a clash of two real genuine heavyweights coming up.
Scandinavian beating time. Sweden versus Norway. You get two of these guys. Xzirez not quite won anything yet, but he's just a well-known figure. He's been #1 legend multiple times with multiple decks. Powder, I think the guy that everybody knows is going to win something soon.
Yeah, well, he's an alliance, right? He's an alliance guy. He practiced with Skaka, with Orange. I feel like those guys have a really good work ethic that is transferred into the results as well, right? So I'm assuming that Powder will do well here. He was doing quite well in DreamHack Summer. It wasn't like the top finish, but still the consistency is there.
Yes, there was Alliance as a whole. There was a time where I think during the DreamHack Summer, they both went out to, I believe, like a 5-0 start, or one was 5-0 and 5-1. So they were really killing down the Swiss portion of that tournament at one point. But it just goes to show, and I mentioned this in the opening as well, that they really do work as a team, Alliance, right? So it's at the moment it's Orange that's having the most success, but Oskaka had a very good finish at Seat Story. Powder has had some recent success as well in Life Coach's Hearthstone Mansion tournament, or whatever the name was of that. So they're picking up finishes here and there as well. But any win that Orange picks up, as he has been doing recently, has to be very much attributed to his teammates as well.
And they're not silent about it as well, right? They actually talk about how much they practice together, how much how much it means to them that they actually have a practice partner that they can rely on, and they do their own job in like dividing, time-consuming actions, right? When you think about it, there's actually a lot of research that you have to do, not only play the game, right? So it's easy to do that stuff when you have 3 people instead of just yourself, and you need to like a rundown. Check all the spreadsheets and stuff, right?
And that group actually expanded for this tournament as well. They practiced not just with Orange and Powder, obviously Oskaka's not here. There's Fluffy, Boston, Sidonia, and Mitsuhide were also in that playtest group. That's a pretty powerful, wide group of players.
Yep, so that's Powder more or less covered, but just talking about Xzirez as well. Never quite sure, Xzirez?
I think so. He gave an interview on HGG and he went for Xzirez. Or Xzirez. He actually says the X as well, which I've never done. So I'm just going to stay with Xzirez.
Fair enough.
It's like the joke from Friends when it's like the lake with the silent E.
Yes. but he's a player we know bits and pieces about. We've had a little bit more exposure to him recently in Hearthstone Global Games, where he was featuring quite prominently for his team. But he is... You do that one more time, there's going to be trouble, Lothar, I promise. But there is... a lot of story behind him. He's very often a deck builder, something we talked about early on in HGG, that he was an advantage for his team to have because it was early in a new metagame and he was really putting together a lot of powerful decks. So yet again, here we are with an unstable metagame, a metagame that's just had a grenade thrown in amongst the pigeons. Is that going to be an advantage for Xzirez?
It should be. I mean, they had 24 hours to react, so they knew about the Rogue, which will help him a lot. 24 hours to react to the elemental thing, I think that helps him too. Maybe not quite so much, as a lot of people just won't mess with things at that point. But yeah, I think that's a good spot for him. But Powder playtesting with that group he playtests with as well. It would be an advantage against most people. It would be an advantage through the Swiss through the day, maybe not so much against Powder.
Yeah, I can see that, but still, I think one of the highlights early on in HGG for Xzirez was this crazy rogue deck he brought, which I think way back before anyone was even considering Fireflies in there, he was playing Fireflies in the rogue. There's also like Leroy Coldblood at the time, so he really like tried to blow the metagame open back then as it was fresh, so I can see him really potentially taking some risks here as well, but we'll find out more about that as we get into the lineup. But
yeah, he also blew it open with Hunter with Fireflies for a short period as well, maybe 2 weeks where that deck was very prominent. But Rogue is the class that needs to be solved today.
Yes.
If you bring a good Miracle Rogue of some kind or a Tempo Rogue of some kind, you could just go through the Swiss with it, I think.
To be fair, the first time I saw Flame Elementals in Rogue, I was like, this literally makes no sense. But then it occurred to me like, oh, the metagame is just so fast. You actually just need a drop, right? You need something to pull off a combo, to play with Cold Blood, right? Play it with Eviscerate, and you need board control. It actually makes sense, although it doesn't seem to be synergetic at the first sight.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because you can just sort of go Firefly on 1, and that works with your Dagger on turn 2 to try and trade out something. And then you get that Flame Elemental that's just such a good combo activator, right? Like it plays with Edwin, it plays with Questing Adventure, it's just a combo activator. So like turn 3 Flame Elemental Eviscerate, for example. You can get some really powerful curves together. But Lorindo, I happen to know you're a bit of a fan of Xzirez's stream as well. So can you tell us a little bit more about him as like a player, like what he's like as a personality?
So Sottle says this because Xzirez actually said that Sottle said something good the other day. I clipped it, and now I'm Xzirez's biggest fan. As a personality, I really like Xzirez because a lot of people you follow on Twitter or on social media in general, you know what they're going to say about an issue. You know who's on which side of various issues, what they're going to say. Xzirez, he might say anything. He just says how he feels at the time, and that varies from day to day. So I find him interesting to watch. He's very outspoken, but he says he doesn't go with the flow. He doesn't always go against the flow either, so very unpredictable guy.
Yeah, he's a very outspoken, opinionated guy, as you say, but like it's considered, right? Like you very rarely get like an outburst from Xzirez. He very much, you know, considers his opinions and then, you know, gives you a reasoned statement about things, which I think goes towards speaking about him as a player as well, because again, it like translates into obviously considering all his options at any given time, and really that shines through in his play when you watch him.
And he considers the bigger picture as well. I know I've cast him for HGG, and he made a point of saying, look, just because I'm the streamer, don't just concentrate on me. My teammates are really good at Hearthstone for Norway. Talk about those guys as well. So he's not selfish with his opinions. He looks at how Hearthstone is as a whole, and that's definitely an advantage as well.
That's very considerate of him. I mean, especially in tournaments like HG, right? You couldn't care less about your teammates. Like, you didn't pick them, right? You don't have to play with them.
There's no captain's pick or anything like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if you're actually giving them the spotlight just, you know, because you're like the most popular one, and you're still giving spotlight to the less popular players, that's actually very considerate, and I'm a big fan of that.
Switching back to Powder, you know, you made the comment that, you know, it's about time. He's probably like one of the best players that's never had that huge win. He's been a real nearly man of the Hearthstone scene, though. We've seen him like picking up some serious like second places at real major events, time after time after time, top 4s, top 8s, second place. But he's been a player that's been around almost from the beginning as well. Like, there is actually a very dwindling group of people who were top players in 2014 that are still hanging around now, right? And to me, that speaks to Powder's work ethic, because the #1 thing that I've seen in him, like, little personal anecdote here, but like, I beat Powder in a very early major, early 2015, I think it was. He was extremely salty afterwards. Like, he was raging at me. He was blaming every other possible thing apart from, you know, internal things about himself. You talk to him now, I had an extended discussion with him at Seat Story. He's like a completely different being, right? Like, when he loses now, it's straight back to like, okay, did I play okay? Yeah, pretty sure I played okay. Okay, did I make the wrong ban? Yeah, okay, I think that was right. Was my lineup wrong, right? Like, he'll always try and find a way to like say, this was my fault, I could have done this better. Well,
I can tell you so many anecdotes from 2014 and 2015 when everyone was blaming just everything apart from himself, you know, when playing. And it was like kind of weird, because at that given point of the game, like, you know, in the beginning, 2014, people actually didn't know how to play the game. Like, seriously, even the best players were making very questionable plays. Like, if you go right now to YouTube and just see the games from that time, it's pretty ridiculous.
Interested to know if Powder's learning a bit from Orange as well in terms of lifestyle. Orange, about 12 months ago, decided, look, I'm going to just focus on Hearthstone and everything else comes second.
And
he's just got massive success from
Very similar transformation, right? Orange used to come to these events, and you get the impression that maybe he valued the social aspect a bit more than the Hearthstone, but that has very much transformed. Powder kind of echoes that. You saw the picks and bans there on the screen very briefly. Shaman ban going down, Paladin ban going down, no Rogue for Xzirez as well, which does surprise me, because I think Miracle Rogue will actually be very well placed in this tournament. Quest Rogue going down, Quest Rogue is actually one of the worst matchups for Miracle Rogue, and Miracle Rogue can often out-tempo many of the control decks that people will want to bring in response to Quest Rogue not being here. Xzirez is one of the real true top-tier Miracle Rogue players out there, so it surprises me a little bit to not see that.
Exactly what I wanted to say. Like, it's so weird that a player that actually knows how to play the deck doesn't opt to bring it, right? This can give you a few conclusions of the metagame. It's either the deck is not positioned well in the metagame that Xzirez thinks he will see, right? Or he just doesn't think that the deck is just good enough, like at all, right? I mean, it's kind of weird. Like, I would expect from players not bringing Miracle Rogue at all because they don't feel confident in playing it. It's not like a deck that you can just pick it up and, like, you know, yesterday and just play it in a tournament tomorrow.
Yeah, I always go back to kind of Casey as my example for this. Casey, my teammate on Complexity. Miracle Rogue is a deck with almost infinite skill cap, right? Like, you can always find more and more edge as you become better and better at the deck. So Casey is a player that feels like he can always bring Rogue to tournaments because he's so good at the deck, he can find his skill edge to come through in those situations. I thought Xzirez would be very, very much similar, but apparently not.
Well, you know, we saw it with Zetalot in summer. Zetalot just got Priest banned every single time he played and just ran right with the other three classes because people were terrified of what he's going to do to them.
Well, that was kind of hilarious when you think about it, because the Priest deck wasn't really that powerful, and I think people were giving too much credit to Zetalot's like skill cap because the deck limits him.
Yes,
basically.
right.
That's my opinion. Like, the deck doesn't have enough tier. Like, the power of the tier is not big enough to give him that edge that Miracle Rogue can give, right? It's not the same. So when someone just respects and bans his Priest, it's not the same as someone banning Cassie's Rogue, in my thinking.
Sure.
So, but it was kind of hilarious still. I
know that Orange came to, I know he's on Powder's side with the play testing, but he came to the conclusion, I think, with his group that Miracle Rogue just isn't good at the moment.
Powder did that?
No, well, Orange did, but they don't always agree. There was one discussion between Orange and Powder, they said, where they're talking about N'Zoth Paladin versus Pirates. And Powder says it's 35% and Orange says it's 75%. And they just can't agree, so they wrote 55 on the spreadsheet and moved on.
They just picked a middle ground and went for it. Interesting. I mean, saying that, like, when we were at Seat Story, Powder and Orange were both there, and we were watching, I think it was Powder playing on stream, and I was watching with Orange. And there was a decision, like, I say as simple, but a decision as fundamental as whether you kept the quest in a certain Quest Warrior matchup. And Powder had never checked with Orange as to whether this was right or not, because Powder assumed it's just obvious that you throw it away. Orange had never checked with Powder because he thought it was obvious that you just kept it. So they'd never reached a consensus on this, and then they were both surprised when they did opposite things when they actually played the matchup.
Yeah, and it's actually another thing to consider when it comes to, like, evolution of Hearthstone. The fact that we got introduced the quest to the game, right? They bring a lot of changes in the decision making. The fact that you have always something in your hand, right, gives you. It's actually not easier. The game it doesn't become easier because of that, because you need to make a correct decision. How do I plan out the entire game from turn one? That's not every single deck. But that's something you can find in those quest decks.
And you're actually putting a card in your deck that you will be in your opening hand that you're choosing to throw away sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, you're ruining your own mulligan on purpose for the strength of the deck sometimes.
One of the many, many bizarre and confusing decisions that you do have to make in a game of Hearthstone. This second series does have a tough act to follow. Both of the opening series that Raven and I had the pleasure of casting were real barn burners, lots of really highly involved control matchups going against each other. But this second series has a lot to live up to, but I believe the players are just about ready to start, as I'm sure people at home will be relieved to hear that the era of Talkstone is coming to an end.
Oh, damn.
No, you guys
more
want to talk some more?
Talkstone, please.
Right,
yeah. No, let's get on with the game as soon as we possibly can. The reason I've got so much to say about Orange and Powder is that Orange and Powder basically playtest together and Orange streamed it. But anyway, I think we're ready to go at last.
Well, without further ado, we will stop talking. We'll lead into this game very, very quickly. Talking you guys through this one will be Lothar and Lorinda, so take it away, guys.
Oh.
Quarters out there.
Yeah. Yeah, now we're gonna cast some games. Actually, I can't remember the last time we did cast.
It's been a long time, probably DreamHack Winter, I think, the last time I cast with you without you hosting and me just talking rubbish.
Yeah.
So, see how this one goes. Who do you think is going to win?
Well, I would put my money on Powder, just because, like, I know they play better.
Sure.
Because that's like a fan favorite thing, right? You always try to cheer for someone who you know better. You kind of like, you know, it's 3 years since I get to know Powder. We actually played a lot of Overwatch together as well.
Right.
So,
Fair enough.
Not maybe on topic, but it's kind of a bias thing, you know. But I'm rooting here for Powder a little bit, and yeah.
Let's see how it goes. Oh, it looks like we're going to have a Jade mirror match at the start, Lothar. What do you know about this particular match in Mulligan?
This is, some people disagree about it, like a lot. Like we have a discussion with Oskaka about it as well, because he thinks that the matchup is always about tempo.
Right.
You just always play for board control. You never go for any like card advantage plays, basically, which is kind of weird because I think the matchup is, it's like game dependent, basically. Like, you know, sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. But the crucial thing about any Druid matchup is the fact that you need to have as many minions as possible with the highest health possible. Why?
Because whoever gets the highest Jade basically just gets it snowballing. If you're 7-7 kills there, 6-6, it lives, they do it again, you repeat the process, you get a massive advantage. But how you go about getting that advantage, like you say, people will argue, should you get mana from the Nourish? Should you get the cards from the Nourish to get the Jades or the mana to play them? And that is still where the skill lies, in balancing that.
Exactly, this is about recognizing the moment when it can do either this or that when it comes to like Nourish, an example, or an example, Jade Idol. Do I go for the idol here? I mean, do I go for the golem here? Or do I go for a shuffle? It's really not an easy question to answer. Depends heavily on how the game is progressing. But the early game is kind of pretty easy. Like, you need to play just as many minions as possible.
Right.
But what you said is also very crucial. Like, when someone has a 7-7, can trade into a smaller creature, right? A smaller golem. The sweet point is actually 2 health more. Like when an example, a 7-7 attacks into a 5-5 and your minion is at 2 HP, it's tough for the Druid player to actually deal with it. Because the only option would be hero power and combination with swipe that goes to another creature, then you take damage in the process. While if it's only just 1 HP, then just kill it with the hero power or wrap for 1 and cycle, which is ideal. Right?
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting what Powder has to do here, because he's going to get behind in the race to make big Jades. But he does have that Wrath available if he wants to cycle it, but it's going to be so messy. Oh, that helps.
Oh,
okay.
Well, that helps.
That helps so much. Just in time, makes everything a lot easier. Obviously, you don't want to waste these cards, like just cycling if you can help it, but the Druid does run low on card draw, and if you're trying to find those Jades, sometimes you have to use it any way you can.
Yeah, that is true, but the fact that Powder is allowed to play his own Behemoth on 10-6 with the same Golem on the side is actually super crucial. And without that play, his only other play would have been actually Innervate, Primordial. I mean, not only play, but that would be one of the plays he could have gone with. And it didn't actually set up anything decent on the board as well, right? It's a good setup for next turn swipe, but the minions would probably die anyway. So very, let's say, tight situation on the board because both players exactly know what they have to do.
Yeah, and you don't often get into this situation. It feels like you should, but what tends to happen is somebody just gets the Jade draw or the ramp draw and goes ahead. But here they're both going to have to use this Nourish in the best possible way, whatever that turns out to be. Powder thinks it's going to be cards, I agree. And just try and get these build up, but he hasn't drawn anything from those at all. Yep. And you would fancy Xzirez a chance of getting back in front here.
Both players don't have... Oh, sorry, Xzirez was actually Jade Blossom. I wanted to say that there's no Jade generation, but Xzirez with the Jade Blossom has access to 1, which is perfect because he can fit that with the Nourish turn. So he can still build up the board while his opponent is behind.
Jade Idol as well there, so he is going to be able to... Did he play one right at the start when we were Talkstoning? If
yes,
not, he'll have to shuffle this one.
10-1 Jade Idol.
He will save that until he does get the Auctioneer, you would think.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree with him here. Like, he's ahead on the board. This is one of the situations when he actually can go further into extension of your board.
Yep.
And you can snowball pretty fast because of the fact that he has a second Nourish already in his hand. That dictated the fact that he just wants to have board control. Because if he would have to spend another 5 mana on card draw, and he will lose the board control that one crucial turn. It will be devastating for him. So he needs to do something right now on the board and just be allowed to draw cards next turn if he needs to, right?
Yeah, interesting thing with this matchup as well is your Drakes are kind of your worst cards. Not your worst, but their 8 mana don't do much a lot of the time. They buy you 1 more card in hand, they stall out the game a little bit, but they don't really have any impact against these monsters that start being made on the other side.
Yep. Xzirez is looking for more cards with Jade Generation, and he got a Jade Spirit. A new elemental card.
Yeah, I'm waiting for people who have more time to start putting more elementals in Druid, see if they can mess around maybe with Servant and make even more Jades. Obviously, these guys had 24 hours notice of that, so unlikely we'll see anything that weird here today.
Yep. Powder with a tough hand, actually. He can't use the Wild Growth yet. At least 1 Jade Idol is being drawn, so that's something.
Yeah, just not much he can do at all here. And how he chooses to use these Feral Rages will be important. Quite often the armor isn't relevant because you just die to however huge the Jade is that's hitting you, so
it's
you
like
tend to use the Ferals as removal.
17 damage to your face doesn't really make a difference.
Oh, heal for 8.
Yeah, exactly.
If you can't hurt me, I'm all armored up.
So being used for tempo, the Feral Rage can make a bigger difference than just being used as a passive skill. Of course, you can have, both options with Fandral, which is ideal, right? But at the same time, Fandral is not really that powerful late game because you probably already used Rafts, you already used the Nourishes. So in this particular matchup, like if you don't hit Fandral in the first turns, like you don't want to see him at all, to be honest.
Yeah, and he's a bit weird with Jade Idol as well. Sometimes he actually messes you up because you want to draw your other stuff before you put the Jade Idols in your deck a lot of the time, but not always. I've seen Kalento shuffle on turn 1 before in the mirror. just let's get those Jades in there and go, which seems completely wrong, but hey, I'm not going to argue with how Kalento plays the game.
True.
It must have been a specific build to do it. I haven't seen him do it every single time or anything, but I've seen him do it and win.
Ooh, oh my god, what a power turn. The fact that he can innovate a Jade Spirit on the same turn is just game swinging right now. This is looking terrible for Xzirez.
Yes, suddenly just having to face down all this stuff. He does have a lot of cards in hand, though, with which to stall out, and his Jades are going to be catching up. But the Aya is such a massive swing here. Notice how fast these two guys are playing this matchup as well. Like, it's one of those matchups they've both played so many times.
Yeah.
Normally, I'd say it's nerves. In the instance of these two players, it is most definitely not nerves. It is just that they know pretty much exactly where they want to be at this point.
That is true, and he goes for the scales this turn, so he wants to kill the 5/5. Interesting. I was thinking about the Feral Rage with the hero power to take the 5/5 and then kill the 2/3 Jade Spirit with your Drake.
Okay, I think with that you don't force the hero power out of him. You don't force maybe the free kill on something else. So is he just buying his last cast?
Time waits for no one.
That is the fact that he actually gave a bigger minion as opponent on the beginning of the turn.
Yeah, just wanting to get rid of that Aya while he's getting a fairly decent value on that minion and worry about the other minion anyway that Powder could have traded his own way. So Xzirez taking the trades into his own hands.
The swing turn happened for Powder, but at the same time he has no more Jade Generation. Fortunately for him, the 2 Airfin skills will actually allow him to do something that you mentioned at the beginning of the game, to have a bigger minion than his opponent and trade in and be in that sweet spot of 2 HP more, or at least, right?
Yep.
And that will be crucial in this situation.
Yeah, it's going to allow him to keep those things on the board nicely. Just a case of exactly how he wants to do it. Does he just want to buff the 7/7 and trade in that way and save the other one for later? Or does he just want to buff the 6/6 and have a 7/7 now?
I would say he would like to buff the 7/7 twice.
Okay.
Just to play around, if I recall correctly, 1 draft was used. So when you're going to put it on 3 HP, a second draft needs to be played, a swipe, right? You play around the second Primordial Drake, and I think that's pretty decent. Like, you play, like, the 6/6 will not die anyway, right? So what's the difference if you play it for a 7/7? Well, only the difference would be the fact that your 6/6 becomes a trade with your next turn opponent Jade Golem, but you're not really fearing that because your opponent is behind on board, right?
Yeah, you've already seen one Drake. Did he know about this one with the Curator? No, because he played the one that he got from the Curator.
Yes,
So
he did.
this was a surprise which caught Powder off guard. And suddenly it's almost swinging back the other way. This Auctioneer into Earthen Scales. If Powder doesn't get another like Jade Spirit or Behemoth or something now, it might actually swing back the other way again.
I'm really surprised that he didn't play the Earthen Scales, the second one, the turn before, because there will be like a disaster scenario, which is an example, Rav and Swipe.
Right.
He loses his entire board, right?
There's a Jade Behemoth on the top. He's fine.
Yeah, but
you're right. That would have been a really bad scenario for him. And Xzirez just hanging in there.
by a thread.
Yeah, he really wants to use this with these Auctioneers, but realising that he can't afford to, he's got to actually just pay attention to the board now so greatly. He's just got to assume that he's going to draw stuff to go with the Auctioneers next.
Oh my god. Powder is drawing some power cards. 1 mana.
1 mana.
Literally the best card in the deck. I mean, it's just 1 mana, 9/9 minion, right?
Seems decent. Must be a Shaman card.
Does it have Overload? 5?
That'll stop it.
Yeah.
All right, so now he's down to the Auctioneer. Sort of Hail Mary, he's trying to get out of trouble. Yeah, and he just gives it up, realising it's all got out of control. And couldn't stem the tide when those Aya turn just changed it all around.
Yeah, but it was pretty close. Still, Powder gave him an opening. Powder basically, by not playing the second Earthen Scales, gave a small chance to Xzirez to actually go get back the board control. And that was kind of scary for a moment, you know?
Yeah, interesting that Xzirez... I think because Powder was out of cards, Xzirez had the situation where he could have played Auctioneer and drawn another card, but he's like, no, I've got 3 cards in my hand, I can play the Jade, and I can use the Earthen Scales, which is the same as playing a Jade, and just hope that Powder doesn't pick much up, because he's used a lot of big cards, and then Powder just picked up another Jade Behemoth.
I don't think there was a point where Xzirez could have actually played the Auctioneer with draw at any point of the game, you know? The problem is, like, if he plays the Auctioneer, you're going to get into fatigue really fast, because he used already 2 Jade Idols. And if you get to that point, you probably will never have the chance to use every single card in your hand because you have limited amount of mana. Your cards are pretty expensive apart from the Jade Idols. So it's pretty hard to use that card advantage in tempo-wise, right? So I think that was a correct decision, but at the same time, the tempo loss on that one turn was just too big for Xzirez to handle. And yeah, it was pretty straightforward, but at the same time, there were small decisions to be made. So, pretty good.
So now it's Lacio standing, and Xzirez queues up the Pirate Warrior. This can be pretty good for the Pirates, but it does need tech to win. And you can see he has the anti-Druid tech. I think everybody realised that Jade Druid was going to be big here. And what Xzirez has done to beat Druid with his Pirates is play a Bitter Tide Hydra, which... the match with Pirates, I think, is favoured for the Druid normally. Slightly, but Bitter Tide, Druid just cannot deal with efficiently enough on top of all of the other threats, and it is enough to turn it around.
If it's played on turn 4 or 5, you're most likely correct. Although, I actually tend to think that the problem with the Hydra is that if it goes late into the game, your opponent can just kill you.
Yeah, they do
before
just
you can
swipe
kill.
you take 7.
I mean, the Hydra doesn't have charge. So there are some turns when you can just play it and die.
Yeah, Primordial Drake, as we see there, if you get that far, can be a nightmare. But I do think, in general, it's a very anti-Druid card. And if you're not going to ban the Druid, it's a really good answer to how you go about building your lineup. And what obviously Xzirez has done is like, okay, I don't want to lose. I don't want to have to waste my ban on Druid that a lot of people will be bringing. I want to be able to have a versatile ban. So I'm going to build my decks with that in mind and then tech them accordingly to swing them. It doesn't matter either way with Bitter Tide and Pirates. Yeah, it has some disadvantages, it has some advantages. But against Druid, which is what he's trying to stop having to ban, this makes him a lot better off.
I mean, in this case, it's just brutal against Powder. Like, there's no better card than the Hydra. Played on turn 4, it's insane.
Yeah,
it's like, the drawback of having the damage to your own face is not really that big when you know you're playing against a Druid that doesn't really have the option to be bursty unless he has a hand of like 2 Feral Rages and a Swipe, an example, and an Innervate on top of that to use those cards in one turn, because that's basically like 7, 11, 15 damage, right, in one turn, just with 3 cards. So that's pretty rough. But in this case, Xzirez has massive damage on board. Now he needs to make correct decisions when it comes to damage allocation.
He doesn't. He's getting slightly low on health, not completely, obviously, but you know, he's just gonna have to be careful how he uses his weapon and his bitter
Exactly.
because, like you said, he could just die. But he should be okay. But he may have to deal with it. Well, he will have to deal with his board before being completely okay.
This is why the Hydra might actually be used to trade with the 5/5 this turn, because what Powder can do next turn is use the hero power, deal 3 damage. Use a Wrath, deal 3 damage.
Yeah.
Right? Use the Jade Spirit, deal 3 damage. That's 9.
And you don't want to play your second Bitter Tide because Swipe
Obviously,
is
right?
going to be ruinous.
So it's a pretty...
Oh,
okay.
He's just decided that if he had Swipe, it would have been used. And so, and he's correct. He probably would have. And so he's just going to go for it here. Get rid of that one just in case as well. And, okay, he's down to 15, but look at this board state for him.
That is true, but still, it's kind of weird when you think about it. Powder with the Primordial Drake just punishes the play. Not only deals 3 damage to the face, but also sets up a taunt that needs to be killed first. And that means Xzirez needs to take 8 damage, most likely, or sacrifice another minion.
Yeah, it's getting pretty rough for him. Obviously, he does have the armor up ability, which is going to bail him out to some degree.
Oh, look at that.
Oh, my God. That hurts.
And he has, you know, 8/8 is great against Druids, but the drawback, sometimes it's really big.
Powder was ready to concede there. You see that flicked on the screen as well.
Yeah, Xzirez is not really feeling good in this situation. There's
There
the
it is.
swipe. 7 damage to the face for 4 mana. Seems like a better fireball to me.
Told you it was a good tech card, that Hydra. Nothing went wrong. Oh. But that's why it was in there. But now he's, and as with Last Hero Standing, when you lose your counter queue, you're quite often in trouble because you don't usually have 2 counter queues. And so Xzirez just down to his mage, which could be okay if it's playing Crystal Runner, if it's playing maybe Kirin Tor, if it's a sort of secret version of the mage.
Sick. One of my favorite cards on Hearthstone, to be honest. Like, I mean, I'm kind of biased because I still remember Xzirez Cup, I think 2 years ago, when I was playing the mage. We actually made the deck with Toida from Fate to Karma, and we both made it out of the groups like with flawless score with the Kirin Tor mage. We both like were 6-0 or something, and the card was just insane at that point, you know. And the problem with the current version of Kirin Tor mages is the fact that Mirror Entity doesn't really give you that much. More battlecry minions. They have just smaller stats. The Mirror Entity is not as powerful as it was before.
Mirror Entity used to just destroy Druid and all of its big minions, but Jade Spirit just says, well, here's 2/3, I don't care. The thing I'm making is the Jade that comes in with it. Jade Behemoth, the same thing.
Exactly.
You get a 3/6, but I get my 3/6 and my 4/4 or whatever, and it's not quite as good. But that said, the Crystal Runner is a hard minion to deal with for the Druid as well, which is why it still works quite well against Druid. Crystal Runner being a 5/5, usually for 4 mana, quite often on turn 4, alongside a Kirin Tor and a Secret. That can still make sure the Druid's in trouble. But as we see here, this is almost certainly Freeze Mage. Xzirez does play a lot of Freeze Mage on his stream, and he's very competent at this deck.
Interesting. Wow. Double Medivh's Valet. Oh, wow. What do you think about just playing the second one here as well?
I think that when you're playing Freeze Mage personally, I mean, to beat this, you're going to have to get damage in early, so that would be interesting for sure. But you also have to look after your resources, so tricky call. But this way he does get rid of 2 minions instead of 1, but he probably misses out on a little bit of damage to the face, and that can be crucial because the Xzirez are sometimes too slow, gives the Druid the time to get all its armor up spells.
Yeah, that's true. He goes for the value trades. Interesting. There's so many things you can do differently here. You can go for the second medieval, like kill the 3/3, right? So I think what he wants to do is always to kind of try for the control value game here. Like we have seen the use of the hero power twice, right?
Yep.
In this case, if there will be a 4/4 Jade Golem, he would like to use the Medivh's Valet and ping it again, right?
Yep.
In this case, he uses the hero power again for the 3rd time.
That's 3 value pings he's got.
3 value pings, very interesting. I mean, the matchup is not favoring him at all.
It's not a good matchup, so trying anything unusual, you know, to maximize your 10% into a 20 or whatever, this is one of the worst matchups you can get. We've seen many good matches played with Freeze versus Druid and still lose.
And he goes for it again. So he had a plan from turn 3, basically, with that Maze Valet. Cool to see that. Cool to see the execution as well. Just the question is it a good decision, right? Maybe the small minions were just having too good time to... too many good occasions, actually, to trade in and benefit from a swipe, an example.
Something he can do this way is he can delay all of his freezes a long time. So by keeping the board here, Jades don't hit you in the face for much if you're freezing them. And if you're not taking much face damage, you can try and set up maybe later on Antonidas into Frostnova. Well, the Druid might not be able to kill it. You've got a Fireball. Then you can maybe Blizzard and get another Fireball and still keep the Antonidas.
I feel like this matchup, Primordial Glyph, is even more important than in other games, because you just benefit from a spell for 0 mana or 1 so much with the Antonidas. It's just insane momentum, you know? And that's crucial.
Yeah, this is what he's doing. He's building up this selection of freeze cards, and he's going to try and get Antonidas to stay on the board for multiple turns and just get a handful of 1,000,000 Fireballs. And, you know, you can't earn the scales for 1,000,000. It's just not a number. So...
Well, in theory, you can, because you have infinite...
You probably can, actually, if you've got
items.
enough time and your opponent won't bottom right it, yeah.
Exactly.
Let's do it.
Look at that.
The thing is, all of this is kind of for nothing, the way Xzirez is trying to play it, because, yeah, these are going to kill you anyway at some point. Doesn't matter how big they get.
Yeah.
So all that's happening here is Powder's building himself bigger minions to get armor with, and Xzirez is just trying for as long as he dare to...
Oh, let's go for the overdraw, right?
Yeah, this is the problem. He hasn't got Alex yet, and you might as well go for it.
I mean, he has an Antonidas, but it's not even, like, whatever he burns here, it's not really that big of a problem. The bigger problem is the fact that he is, like, way behind the board. Fortunately, this card wasn't burned.
Yeah, this is a card he can play as well. This is important. He wants to get a handful of stuff that he can play. At the moment, his hand, he's saving the damage, he's saving the Antonidas. Fireball's not the end of the world.
Yeah, Fireball is, like, decent for Xzirez, and decent outcome. I would say the best one would be a card draw card.
Right.
Archon Intellect, the second Acolyte of Pain, but we're here to use that. We see the Glyph instead.
Frostnova, this is definitely the thing I was talking about. He can go for this a turn early if he wants to. No, he can't. He's only got 7. Excuse me, I thought it was on turn 10. But next turn, he can start going for this repeated freeze, turn your freeze cards into Fireball strategy that he's gone from the very start, that you highlighted with those pings that he was going for value with.
Yeah, and he goes still for that, which is quite interesting, because the Golems are going out of range of Flame Strike. The next one will require Flame Strike and Blizzard in consecutive turns. So most likely next turn, Blizzard.
Yep.
It's gonna kill one Behemoth, freeze the other guy, and then next turn has to be Flame Strike to deal 4 damage to the next Jade Golem as well, which is 7/7 then. And it's kind of spirals out of control because you're losing the potential damage. You still have the one Frostbolt, but after that, you're like, you're kind of running dry. And your opponent with that Auctioneer draw and probably having another one at some point of the game will just run rampant.
Yeah, and that's a big deal, this Fandral being played now as well, because this means that the Feral Rage you can put your face into the Antonidas and still gain some armor. Okay, it's before the Alexstrasza, which isn't ideal, but it's still the situation. He knows what Xzirez is going for here. Yeah,
and now it's like, do I kill the Fandral? My plan was to play actually Blizzard this turn. So do I change that?
I think he might go for Antonidas and just freeze and just see if it sticks. If it sticks now, you get more Fireballs, and then next turn you can freeze again with the Blizzard. If that then sticks, you get another Fireball, and possibly even another. And yeah, he's just going to turn his hand into a handful of Fireballs.
Yeah, he has 9 cards in hand. That's also a small problem.
Yeah, he's had this problem since about, well, of course, of all the value he got from those early pings, he hasn't used any cards, and he's having to dump them.
So he knows that the only way of killing that Antonidas would be Wrath into Swipe.
Yeah, or Feral Rage because the Fandral is on the board. But yeah, the realistic way is the swipey stuff.
He used the Frostbolt to play around it, right? So very well timed Frostbolt here to play around the outs for Powder, because that's the only win condition for Xzirez right now.
Yep.
I mean, maybe not 100%, but I feel like this is his only out. And he feels like this is the moment when I can't really play for value anymore.
Right.
and I just need to switch to be the aggressor.
This is like the payoff for that value. This is him turning that value into fireballs.
But the problem is, with that value that he was going for in the beginning of the game, now he's facing the fact that he has a full hand.
Right, yeah.
Right? It's like, wait, I saved all those cards, and I want to generate more, but I don't have space for them.
Yeah, and unfortunately for him, he didn't get the Alex, but he is going to be able to, like, freeze, get a fireball, maybe launch a fireball at face, maybe even attack face, except it's not going to happen. But if those taunts weren't there, he'd be able to get an Antisiders through for an attack at some time. That would be a bonus.
Another Frost Nova. That's not bad, actually. So you can translate that into one fireball this turn. And, oh man, all spells. All spells. And you can't play Acolyte of Pain at all. Interesting. This is like such an interesting position to be in.
He's trying to manipulate it so that he can get the Antonidas through for some attacks as well. So if Antonidas can attack face, that's like extra fireballs that aren't in your hand. They're just things on, you know, he's like a 5 attacking fireball nearly on the board, which is pretty handy, obviously.
Yeah. Power in the thinking mode.
How
would I deal with it? Here we go. That was really needed.
If he didn't get that, Xzirez' strategy was probably going to come off because next turn it all starts going face.
I mean, he has an Auctioneer on the board. What are the chances of not drawing an answer, right?
Sure, yeah, I agree.
And he's still Fandral, so he can just allow himself to tank that Antonidas, give him a bite with that Pharaoh Rage and just be like, yeah, well, I don't really care that much. You didn't play Alex Straza as well yet, so I know you don't have it in your hand. I can be aggressive. I'm just going infinite with Jade Idols anyway.
Yeah.
And I still have an Elfin Scales. So that means that one Elfin Scale for 1 mana will be more valuable with that like Straza's effect. Which is pretty nice.
Xzirez did generate, was it 4 fireballs in the end, I think? So that's 24 additional damage, which is the problem for the deck. So he solved that problem. Now the next problem is the usual freeze mage problem. I've used a lot of freezers, and I'm still getting hit in the face if I stop freezing.
Yeah. It's kind of problematic. Now, there was one strategy at some point, I mean, at some point, it was actually pretty popular, that you keep your opponents... You keep your opponent's Gazetted Auctioneer on the board just to make him go into fatigue
before
faster.
Jade Idols were a thing.
Yeah, but then someone decided to make a Jade Idol, and it's like, yeah, well, you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, that's the end of that strategy.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can see how that would work here, right?
Yeah.
There's no way that Powder would be able to kill him really quickly.
Without even, like, he couldn't benefit of having spells in the hand, he couldn't benefit of the fact that he wanted to overextend the board because the board is already full. Frost Nova would be more impactful, Blizzard would have been more impactful. And in this situation, it's like, well, to be fair, he can just play more Jade Idols and not give a damn, right?
Yeah, right. So that's the strategy you can no longer use. And Powder's actually just happy burning cards. That's why he's keeping the Jade Idol in his hand. Yeah. Just in case that happened to get burned or something, the last one.
I mean, he is at 35 HP. 1 Elfin Scale in his hand still. The Pharaoh Rage, not even important. The Aya generates an 8-8 and a 9-9. So that Elfin Scale is a minimum of 10 HP next turn.
Yeah, so there's 35 HP versus 34 in hand, but there's an infinite amount of Earthen Scale coming almost as well later on. And he's just delaying it as long. He knows he can't die in 2 or 3 turns, so he's just waiting for the maximum he gets from that Earthen Scales, which will be enormous. But if he hadn't picked, and he had a lot of chance, he had that Gadgets on board, but had he not picked up that removal for Antonidas, this could have been different, because that would have been then 5 to the face plus more fireballs.
I mean, it's still like, let's be honest, like, what's the plan for Xzirez here? You have the damage in your hand, but it's still not enough, and you're facing another problem, which is the board control of your opponent. So even if you pull off this Doomsayer, your opponent still has refills. Even Primordial Drake is a problem right now.
Yeah, and this is why he doesn't queue this matchup second, of course, because it's just one of the worst matchups in Hearthstone. Those Bitter Tide Hydras were supposed to get the job done, so this doesn't happen, and they didn't. And this is the position he finds himself in. This Swiss, of course, if you do lose in this round, it's 10 rounds of Swiss. You can afford to lose at least twice.
Yeah, I mean, losing round 1 is terrible. Losing round 2 is also not really that great.
10 rounds losing round 2 does hurt your tiebreakers, but there shouldn't be many, if any, 8 and 2s don't get through because we haven't had everybody turn up.
You need to actually see who was making like the top 8 while losing like round 1.
Yeah.
I think
It's
that
been
was
done. You said it.
I think that was. Who was that?
Was it
Crane?
Unit?
I think Crane did that
Okay.
in Valencia last year.
Well, just loses round one and then wins like 1 million in a row.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I think it was Unid, but I could be wrong on that. But somebody at Winter went 0-2 and still got in on tiebreakers above somebody else who didn't go 0-2. Like when they finished at 7-2.
Unlucky.
Harsh. I mean, the other player had lost in like rounds 1 and 4, 1 and 3. It wasn't like a massive overtake, but he did overtake somebody.
All right, so Powder did use his Feral Rage offensively instead of going for the armor. Doesn't really butter him that much. He still has the Alpha Scale in his hand. Ooh, what a bad card to draw right now.
Yeah.
I mean, not even for this match. It's like
For
people.
the mirror match, for all the Medivh Mage matches.
I mean, all the people that you play against now will probably know that you have a Secret Eater in your deck. It's kind of unlucky.
Yeah, it is unfortunate when you're on stream and that happens. But you can expect it in Last Hero Standing in particular. Again, we've stressed that this is not a match he wanted to run into, so you don't tech for your mage to beat the Druid. It's not supposed to beat the Druid. That's not the job it's in the lineup to do.
Yeah.
It's like when you run out of substitutes and you get a man sent off, somebody's got to go in goal, and sometimes it ends badly for you.
So, is there a way for Powder to set up Lethal and Fatigue? Xzirez should be like on 3 or 2 cards, right? So you can push Xzirez into drawing 3.
Put Yogg into Flare.
Ha! Oh yeah, that's lethal. Lethal. What I'm talking about, right? Should have just played it.
Everybody knows how that works, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's
Xzirez puts us all out of our misery, and Powder well, you called it, a 3-0 win.
Well, to be fair, like the fact that the Jade Druid just carried, you know, the entire match probably shouldn't happen. But at the same time, I feel like Powder played it really well. There was maybe one situation I was kind of anxious about the board situation with the second Elfin Scale, right? But apart from that, he was sticking to his plan, to his game plan. It was really well executed, and Xzirez was actually making good decisions as well. Like when it comes to like how he wants to win against the Jade, right, was on point. The fact that he did draw like 2 Hydras with the Pirate Warrior was kind of unlucky. Like
yeah, I mean he did.